Hello there, I'm John Caruso and welcome to our Automotive Industry Insights series. And today we'll be speaking to Brett Mills, a dealer principal with Ken Mills Toyota, Nambour and Maroochydore. Brett, hydrogen is often mentioned as another potential zero emissions fuel. What exactly is hydrogen mobility?
So hydrogen, I'll talk about it from a Toyota perspective first, but hydrogen's been identified as a propellant or a way of providing energy for cars in two ways by Toyota. The first is hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. Now, these have been around for a while, actually. So you can buy a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle now. If you wanted to, you probably wouldn't because it's probably not practical for most consumers. Toyota has a vehicle called a Mirai. It's a large passenger car about the size of a Camry. What is it? It's effectively an electric car. It has a small battery on board and it has a hydrogen fuel cell. In simple terms, what's the hydrogen fuel cell? It's like a generator. Hydrogen flows in with clean air that's actually cleaned on the way in to the engine, to the fuel cell. The atom splits and it produces electricity and it produces water. The water's pushed out the tailpipe and the electricity gets pumped into the relatively small battery or into the engines that are driving the vehicle at the particular time. So simple way, hydrogen fuel cell vehicle, electric vehicle, small battery, got a hydrogen generator on board. The other way that hydrogen's used is actually as a direct propellant into combustion engines. Toyota is looking at this. One of the racing vehicles that Akio Toyoda, who's the chairman, races is I think it's a GR Corolla, and it's got a onboard engine that's been converted to be powered by hydrogen. So, whether we'll see that use of hydrogen in scale, I'm not sure, but the important part about that is that in order for a new form of fuel or technology like hydrogen to work, you need mass consumption. And so if you start thinking about outboard motors, for example, it's kind of hard to have batteries in a boat because they're heavy and the boat's in water, right? It's not really a good combination. But I know in Japan you're seeing manufacturers of outboards there really interested in how hydrogen can be used as a propellant in a combustion engine. So the only emissions that come out of a hydrogen fueled combustion engine is the little bit of oil that gets burned through the normal process of the engine moving. So it's incredibly low. So the hydrogen itself as a propellant produces no carbon emissions at all.
The interesting conversation when discussions are around EVs and then someone talks about tankers, boats, trains and planes, and you really then have to stop and think, well, how will we, moving forward, actually fuel and propel those kinds of vehicles? So why don't we hear a lot about hydrogen? I remember looking at that the Mirai, the website many years ago, because I think the only thing that comes out the tailpipe is a drop of water. I don't hear any other manufacturers looking deeply. So how viable is it that we could be using hydrogen to propel our vehicles in the future, Brett?
I think it's highly likely. There are other manufacturers very invested in hydrogen, Hyundai particularly, and perhaps their interest is because they also manufacture large boats and all sorts of things that they build. So Toyota, interestingly, will have a hydrogen bus for sale, I think, in Australia in the next couple of years. And current Hilux that we have in 2028, there'll be a hydrogen fuel cell version of that vehicle available to be bought in Australia. Why hydrogen potentially gets traction in a country like Australia is it's suitable for larger vehicles and trucks and marine and, goods transporting type vehicles. And the reason it works for them is a lot to do with weight. So the fuel cell itself, it looks a bit like an engine. It's obviously got a bit of weight to it, but it's not that heavy. hydrogen itself is not that heavy. But mainly what happens is you get a huge reduction in the size of the battery required. So one of the issues around even, as a form of technology, plug-in hybrid in some utes is you have a big compromise on the load carrying capacity because the battery is so heavy. And even though battery technology will improve moving forward, it's still going to be a little bit of an issue. So I think if, the manufacturers of buses and trucks in a country like Australia start to see what hydrogen is capable of and start to bring that technology in, you then start to create that tipping point where the cost of the hydrogen itself and the infrastructure required becomes, the economies of scale make it work. Basically, hydrogen can be transported. I read a thing years ago, the CSIRO in Queensland actually worked out how to convert hydrogen into like a powder for the purposes of transportation and then convert it back to a gas at the other end. So
Is that because it's considered dangerous, or is that a fallacy?
no, it's just because it's a gas and it takes up space. Yeah, so they're working out over time. I've seen the changes in the sizes of the hydrogen tanks. So they're working out how to store it more effectively. That's the issue, is that it's a gas and it takes up space. Yeah.
Is it an economy of scale, the reason why we haven't heard more about hydrogen development in this country? Or
I think there's a few reasons. Look, I think there's just been this fascination and there's been a drive for EV technology driven by certain sectors of the commerce in Australia and most countries. I think hydrogen has a lot of potential applications outside of just moving vehicles. Hydrogen generators are being assembled by Toyota in Altona in Melbourne at the moment, which, if you start to think out loud, all of a sudden, is hydrogen potentially, could it power my house? Do I actually need to have a connection to a grid? I think there's a maybe bigger picture, with something like hydrogen, that you start thinking about it like it's the most abundant element on Earth. I've seen hydrogen, if you sort of said, let's go to a service station and make this service station be able to supply hydrogen. There's a device that's about, the size of about 3 household doorways that basically turns into a bowser for hydrogen. So it's not that hard to actually get the infrastructure in place, probably compared to having to get electricity infrastructure in place.
Australia is often discussed as a potential hydrogen producer. Could hydrogen play a role in Australia's transport future? I think you've answered that already, but talk to me more about how are we in a prime spot to produce hydrogen?
Not a miner or a scientist, but I think, again, one of the interesting aspects about hydrogen is there's only one way to obtain hydrogen. There's many ways. I believe it can be mined. You can get it from, I think in Japan, it literally comes out of the ground. You can get it through vegetation. I've heard stories about rotting vegetation being used to produce hydrogen. I believe it's a byproduct from the process of making power using nuclear. So obviously very abundant and in a lot of places, and it's an element. So I think the interesting thing with hydrogen is that the production process as well has many ways of being green.
Toyota,